as I am. I'm Associate Dean Dr. Brianne Davila. I want to give some acknowledgments to the Department of Theater and New Dance, their chair, Professor Sarah Cranen, who is loaning us this beautiful space. Jonathan Bastow helped with setup. Media Vision's here to preserve everything fabulous that's going to happen in the next hour. And Class Council, hey, Class Council in the back, sponsored lunch. So thank you for that, so we don't have to be hungry and engaged, okay? I'm going to turn it over to our moderator and our panelists, but thank you again for being here. And if you have ideas for how to engage students, things you want to talk about outside the classroom, please send me an email. I want to hear from you.
Hey everyone, shall we do quick intros of ourselves? Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Anthony Ocampo. I am the chair of the Department of Sociology, and I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
Hi everyone, my name is Erica Morales. I am a professor of sociology.
Hello everyone, my name is Donzel Lewis. I'm an assistant professor of performance and education here with the Theater and New Dance Department.
Hi everyone, I'm Christy Tigner. I'm assistant professor of music industry studies in the music department.
Wonderful. First of all, let me ask how many times have folks watched the Bad Bunny performance? Who watched it once? Raise your hand. Who's seen it twice? Who watches it every other day? I think there's something to that, right? This is a performance at the Super Bowl that was unlike any other musical performance in previous years, and it came on the heels of so many things. Bad Bunny won Album of the Year, in which he very publicly voiced his support for immigrant communities rooted in love. And it also is coming on the heels of everything that's happening with ICE raids throughout the country, places like Minnesota, Los Angeles, our own backyard. And so this performance was more than just a musical performance. But I want to just, before we get to our panelists, just start, because I think you can't really understand the performance without having at least a little bit of understanding of the colonial history of Puerto Rico. So for who's been to Puerto Rico, raise your hands. And for anyone that's been to Puerto Rico, you can literally see the colonialism. You see the Spanish architecture, you see the influence of religion, people there have Spanish last names. And then after the Spanish colonialism in 1898, along with the Philippines, Puerto Rico became a US colony. And since 1916, Puerto Ricans have been US citizens, meaning that Benito, his mother, his grandparents, they're all US citizens. They are Latino, but they're also US citizens. And so this is an interesting paradox because we've witnessed in this country the ways that Latinos have been made to be seen as foreign, as not belonging to this country, when in fact, by law, Puerto Ricans have been citizens for generations. So I want to just mention that because inherently there are so many paradoxes with being a colonial entity. With Puerto Rico, it is part of the United States. So Puerto Ricans can be drafted for the military, but they can't vote for president. That's a contradiction. Puerto Ricans were brought here to work on the agricultural fields and various forms of manual labor. But when it came to self-expression, it was often shut down. They were shut down culturally. So people in the United States didn't want to see their cultural expressions. It was penalized in so many ways. And so having Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance, which was just what do you call it? A mosaic of Puerto Rican culture and history is all the more meaningful. So I want to just open up with just a fun question, which was, what was your just raw reaction to the Bad Bunny performance?
So for me, I'm Puerto Rican. I'm born and raised in New York, but my family is Boricua. I identify as that. And for me, that was the most Puerto Rican thing I've ever seen on TV or in film. Like that was, and I was texting family members about it, and my parents, my brother, and other people, and we were full of joy because we had never really seen ourselves represented that way. I mean, the stereotypical Puerto Rican representations are like West Side Story, for example, right, which was a Broadway musical. Some of you may be familiar with it, but very like sort of stereotypical representations of people with accents and sort of like again, a lot of themes around not belonging, right? But to be able to see that was really powerful, to see Benito's performance in that way.
And what were some of the images that you think popped the most that were like very specifically Puerto Rican?
Yeah, the casita, when he's on the casita, which I know is a part of his performances, but he's on top of the house and he's dancing. That reminded me of casitas in Old San Juan and other, right? Because they're pastel colors and kind of like flat roofed areas. It reminded me of like my grandfather's hometown, San Sebastian. I think piraguas, which are like shaved ice, right? Which is our version of shaved ice. I mean, there was a lot of moments, but those are some of the ones that really stood out to me.
For me, there was a lot of pride and joy and solidarity watching it the first time, and that initial reaction of the excitement of, yes, tell your story, tell the story. And that solidarity there of being able to see other people of color up there at that time, when the Super Bowl happens, it becomes the world's largest stage at that time. And to be able to have that highlighted. I also have some friends who are Puerto Rican who I'm texting at the time, and I call them right after, and there's a lot of curiosity, right? And I was like, okay, this is what I picked up on, now tell me what I didn't see. What's the nuance that I missed here? And so there was that curiosity of like, tell me more.
Can I hear just a quick snippet of what you shared what resonated for you, but what were some of the things that you might have missed?
Definitely the story of the specificity of what was happening with the community. There's moments when Bad Bunny is going through, and the camera's following him, and he's stopping along the ways, and it's almost like he's at these little pit stops, and each stop is a cultural moment, and that was the moments where my friend, she would explain, like, okay, well, right now it's happening where they're playing dominoes here, or she talked about the shaved ice. Right now it's happening here. When we get to the house, she's explaining what's happening in this moment, and so being able to follow that and track that in that way, and then have someone explain that was also really exciting.
And later on in this conversation, I want to talk about the power of everyday moments, from the casita to playing dominoes. Chrissy.
Yeah, so I'm here as a Bad Bunny fan. I'm not Latina, I'm not a native Spanish speaker, but I was first introduced to Bad Bunny, not when I was in Puerto Rico, but I was actually in the Dominican Republic. And this is like back in 2017. And I didn't speak any Spanish, and for whatever reason, that universal language of music spoke to me with his music, and didn't understand a word of it, but I became obsessed in 2017. So to see the Super Bowl performance after many years of being a fan and starting to learn Spanish partly because of his music, my initial reaction, honestly, I lost my voice screaming at the performance. But one of the things that really stuck out to me wasn't just this incredible representation of Puerto Rican culture musically, but also culture with these cultural moments. But I also thought that the shout out to all of the Americas as a unit was really, really powerful. I know that my partner's from Nicaragua, so I was watching it with a Nicaraguan, and the minute that Nicaraguan flag came up, it was like our room erupted, because it's bigger than just Puerto Rican culture and Puerto Rican music. It was a representation of what it is to be Latino in these times in a very joyful way through music and performance.
Yeah, so speaking of being Latino in these times, I want to touch very briefly, because I want to anchor a conversation in the joy and the resistance and the political impact of the performance. But long before the show even happened, in the weeks leading up, there were a lot of reactions from various characters in this country. I was wondering if you could just speak to some of those reactions, those visceral reactions to Bad Bunny, and what does that say about the state of our country right now?
I could go. All right. For me, seeing stuff, which as a Puerto Rican person, I hear it all the time. People don't know that we're citizens, and it drives a lot of my family members crazy. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with being obviously an immigrant, but it's just interesting that people just don't know history, right? They don't understand. And so you always have to explain. I remember getting my hair done once and somebody saying to me, oh, what kind of money do they use over there? And I was like, it's the US dollar. Like, you know, so when there was commentary about, oh, why is he speaking in why is the whole thing gonna be in Spanish? And oh, like, we always have Americans on the Super Bowl halftime show. Being Rihanna's from Barbados, you know, like U2 is from Ireland, right? I mean, there's all these people that have performed that are not from here, and he actually is from a U.S. Commonwealth, right? So that kind of is infuriating in a lot of ways. I think alienating for a lot of Latinx people in the space.
That's a good question. Let's see if I can be succinct with this. You mentioned the characters across the country, the reactions of the characters. This, and what does this say about the state of our country now? This is the state of our country consistently. This is not anything new.
Thank you, yes.
Right, like this, that was when I started to hear the reaction, I was like, oh, this is a tale as old as time when it comes to American colonialism and the effects of it and white supremacy. And this idea that if we can control the artist or if we can limit what they say, we can control what message gets out. So there was a lot of resistance to, there's gonna be a lot of Spanish speaking, right? But that means that I don't know what they're saying. I can't tell if that message is being sent to motivate or to inspire the revolution. How do we get to control this? So it became a story about these characters wanting to control, coming from a culture of control and a culture of power of how do we shut this down before we open that up? Because once that is open, we can't put it back in.
Right, and therein lies the power of language, right? Language is one of the tools of the oppressors to erase people and their histories. Chrissy?
Yeah, and I think building, perfectly said, by the way, building on this though, also this idea that if you do not understand the language, you cannot control the narrative. Building on top of that from a musical standpoint, I also want to add in that this resistance to the Spanish language in general is a resistance to language, but it doesn't open up the curiosity when it comes to the universal language of music, which I thought was very interesting. They're like, let's do an alternative halftime show. Go ahead, everybody watch this because it's in English and that's the only thing that matters. Rather than remaining curious about, well, maybe if I don't understand the language of the spoken word that's in this music, maybe I can be curious to learn maybe about like the rhythms that are used and the chord progressions and the style of music and maybe learn something new. And I do think that there's, you know, in the state of our world today, there's a lack of curiosity for anyone that's other than what is the status quo.
So let's talk about resistance, because I think in a lot of ways the Spanish was an act of resistance, but in Bad Bunny's, I was gonna say Oscar speech, in his Grammy speech, he's very explicit. No ice, you fight hate with love. On the Super Bowl performance, things were a little bit more subtle, and I want to talk about these everyday acts that were depicted throughout the performance, and just ask. And you could tether this to this, as well as other movements with other communities of color. How do everyday moments of joy function as an act of resistance?
I will say, I think speaking from a personal standpoint, in relation to the legacy of how I came to be, coming from a queer background and from a enslaved background, joy is internal and it can't be taken away. So when everyday acts of joy happen in the marginalized spaces, it threatens the existence of the oppressor. Because that means that you understand the autonomy of who you are and the agency of who you are, and that you will find the moments that you need to keep going, to survive and thrive, because joy can never be taken away.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, and I think that what stands out for me in the moments of joy were the language. I mean, Benito even said, right? Oh, you have 4 months to learn. If you're uncomfortable, yeah. And I'll say this as a Boricua, right? I'm several generations in. I'm not a Spanish speaker, right? I grew up. English was my dominant language. For many of my family members, it's the same, but we could still appreciate the performance. And yes, there's a cultural connection. But even if you didn't have that cultural connection, there's still a lot to appreciate in those moments. But I think the language, I think seeing the dancing and having like salsa be a part of that experience, there's a lot of resistance moments. I mean, he had like the lighter blue that was represented on like Lady Gaga's dress, or the light.
I want to talk lighter
sorry.
blue. No, I want you to talk about what lighter blue.
Okay,
how
yeah.
it functions.
Yeah, that's part of the independence movement, right? So there's a huge debate going on the island if people are not familiar around whether Puerto Rico should be its own nation, right? Should sort of get rid of the colonized situation, right, with the U.S. and be its own nation. Whether some people want statehood and for it to be absorbed as a state of the United States. And so there's this issue around Puerto Rican independence is a real thing. And so that lighter blue represents that. Even the flower that she had was the flower of Puerto Rico, right? So like there were things where he was speaking to that. And of course, like the part on the poles, the electric poles was also speaking to what happened in Hurricane Maria and people like not having resources and the power constantly being shut out. Especially after Hurricane Maria, but even before that, right? The power grid has been taxed. It's taxed by over-tourism. It's taxed by the fact that things have not been kept up, right? The U.S.'s responsibility to the island is not really there. So there's a lot. I don't want to give, I know people might want to discuss other things, but there's a lot happening with that and the resistance, but joy, I think, in that and asserting like who you are.
One of the things that was mentioned was, and I want to vacillate between my questions and audience questions, so I'll ask this one. As a queer person, but in my queer circle of friends, a queer Latinx, queer friends of color, Bad Bunny's an icon for a variety of reasons. He's willing to bend gender, he wears skirts, he dresses in drag. He has other gendered messages. So for example, some of his songs embrace pleasure and sexuality, particularly for encouraging with like all people, not just men. But I want to talk about the hidden queer messages throughout. I was remembering the two men that were dancing at the truck. I was remembering other sort of like Ricky Martin, who is an openly queer artist. As a, what did you think about the way queerness, as well as actually gender and feminism, how did that come into the performance?
I can speak on Ricky Martin.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of speculation about who were going to be the guests in this performance. And I think that choosing Ricky Martin to be one of the guest performers, particularly to sing Lo que pasó a Hawaii, was probably one of the most brilliant parts of this for me, musically, culturally. Mostly because, Ricky Martin, in terms of an artist, like for most of his career, was really encouraged to sing in English in order to cross over into another market, not be able to embrace singing in Spanish. And also, as an openly queer person, I think that he has faced so much as like this older generation, musically. To have him come and sing probably the most politically charged song on that album, I think was really, really brilliant and an amazing representation, not just representation, but also as just paying tribute to everything that he's done as an artist. So yeah, I think that at least on the musical side too, I thought it was the best possible choice.
Absolutely agree, and to add on with that, the ripple effect of our existence, we never know how far it's going to go, right? When you throw that stone into the water and the ripples happen and it goes out. Ricky Martin, his queerness was not to be celebrated when he was at his height, right? So he is an ancestor, so to speak. It's carrying the baton, right? That one makes it through, and they make it so far, and then another comes behind. And what was beautiful in that moment was the reach back. Because we oftentimes don't get that sometimes. And we don't recognize that we get to where we are because of those who came before us. And to see this happening was an amazing experience. But then also, I was at a Super Bowl party with a bunch of gay men, and you know, they were watching the show. Then Lady Gaga comes out, and then everyone is watching the show. And so even in that moment, he was smart in that moment because Mother Monster came out of nowhere. And now, those who may not have been watching now want to see because of what she represents and what she's done. So it was very scaffolded and intentional.
Yeah, and he stated that his relationship to Gaga is quite similar to the experience of young queer folks, which is Gaga provided a lifeline for him, and when he was experiencing difficult times emotionally, Gaga was a lifeline for him. I have a ton of questions here, but I know that I want the folks in the room, particularly students, to ask questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I
Yes.
add one other thing real quick? So yeah, with Ricky Martin, I thought it was interesting too, like for somebody who, again, like Gil pointed out, like who was told to cross over, like Selena, like so many other artists before, to speak in English, to appeal to a wider audience. And he goes from living La Vida Loca, right, to like singing a song about we don't want to end up like Hawaii, and talking about the colonization connections, right, between Hawaii and Puerto Rico. I thought that was really powerful. It was a statement to be there as a queer man, Puerto Rican man, and to assert himself in that space. I want to touch on the feminist aspect real quick. So I was watching an interesting breakdown. This is like New Rock Stars, an interesting breakdown from a Puerto Rican woman who talked about, and she had seen this from somebody else giving another breakdown. So it's interesting to hear people's interpretations. There's a part where it's very subtle, where women are standing, and they're not really dancing. They're by these bricks, like young women. And so the interpretation there was that women are the sort of the foundation of the house, right? And talking about like the houses in Puerto Rico, how like they're not always that stable, particularly the roof, but without the bricks, right, the blocks, the cement block, you don't have the foundation to sort of move. Women were dancing to a song that was about like a dance that women often do, where they were like shaking their butts, and people, of course, some people had issues with that, right? But like that being a popular dance of women like asserting their femininity and their sexuality in that space. So
And
just
being left alone, dancing
Right.
on their own, not bothered.
Yes, exactly.
And it was a dance that was punished
Yeah.
in previous
Yes.
iterations
Yes.
of history. They literally tried to be erased
Yeah,
so
but
that
I
Puerto Ricans could properly assimilate to
Yeah.
American society. I want to open it up. I see a hand. Could you please share your name and what major, perhaps?
Yeah, hi, my name is Sophia. I'm a communications major and PR. So I think when you're talking about queerness,
he especially sings this song called Perreo Sola, so I think that's like the one that you're saying, which I think he could have he has so many hits that he could have chosen any other one. Like, and in that music video, people are gonna look it up, like, oh my god, this has such a great like rhythm, music type thing, and they're gonna see like he's actually dressed as a woman in the video. So people can get more like even more touched or more invested on Bad Bunny's history and impact, because at the end of the day, like, he's trying to make his best on creating between a love environment world, because he's trying to use his outlets at the best of his ability. But yeah, I agree with what you were saying, the three of you, like, but I wanted to mention, like, if you want to literally see like how the impact, you can just go back like and see it for yourself, like how he literally has always been open, because that song has been at least like 7-8 years around.
And I love that you brought up the music video, because also the messaging in the music video, there's explicit messages that are trying to counter domestic violence,
Yeah,
which
like
is
the song Andrea.
As well,
Mhm.
it's like about like a feminicide in Puerto Rico, which it's like kind of like insane, like how he's trying to portray like so many words in such a song and trying to match it on a beat where everybody can learn the music and just talking about feminicide.
Thank you, Sophia. I just wanted to offer, did you want to ask a question? Or okay.
But
Yeah. Yes. Could you please introduce yourself and your name? And I'm going to repeat your question because we're being recorded so that the recording can hear it clearly.
Hello everyone, my name is Mona. I'm an English grad student. So I had a question regarding the outcome of his performance. Before the Super Time performance, there was obviously a lot of protests breaking out from what happened in Minnesota with Liam Ramos and across the states, right? There was a lot of protests happening. After the Super Bowl performance, I've seen it stopped, I think, from so far that I've been looking at the media. Going back to what you said about this being a controlled state, right? Do you think this was a performance that was allowed to appease the people and to maybe halt the protests? Or how do you guys see, how do we keep the movement alive and not just be okay with just some level of representation?
Just want to repeat the question for the recording. Give you time to think because it's a good question. So it was Mona?
Yes.
Mona's question was, prior to the performance, there was a series of protests, pro-immigration, anti-ICE protests. It's seemingly after the performance of Bad Bunny, you observed that the protests seemed to stop. And so your question is there some sort of relationship between this performance happening and the quelling of public forms of protest? This is a good sign. This is like
It's a big question. I'm trying to figure out. I have a lot to say. I'm trying to respect time and be succinct. I think a few things. We have to understand that the protests have not stopped. The coverage of it in mainstream media may have reduced, but it's still out there. We just have to find ways that we don't allow it to be filtered out and that we don't allow ourselves to disengage. I think that also the performance was a performance in love, and the other side was ready and prepared for a different energy. So when they got the energy of the message of love and unity, and the mirror got thrown back on them, that they were the anti-American story with this idea of an alternative Super Bowl show, right? They were the ones sending a message of exclusion and of hate and of oppression. And I think they had to take time to confront themselves about that because the mirror was there. And I also think that when you're talking about how do we keep it going, I ask that to you, right? What are we all doing in our daily lives to keep it going? And understanding that keeping it going comes in different ways. Sometimes it is in caring for your community. Sometimes it is in financially supporting movements. Sometimes it is educating. Sometimes it is having conversation and dialogue. Sometimes it is creating art. Sometimes it is sharing art. But yeah, how do we keep it going is up to all of us collectively. And that's what I'm saying.
I think your question raises an interesting, if I could chime in if that's okay, this historical pattern. Whenever there's any sort of activism or fight for social justice, there is this pattern if you get some sort of concession, it can, whether it's a cultural performance, representation, or whether it's, for example, like a law that's changed. There is an inclination to feel like that's the end result, and so the key is to keep going. That takes a lot of energy to do, and resistance comes in many forms. But just throwing it out to folks, what impact did the performance have on folks in the room? I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
Honestly, straight up, I cried because as a Latina, as a daughter of immigrants, I feel like sometimes Latinos can be divided, but I felt like being around like Nicaraguense, Guatemalans, Salvadorians, like I felt like such a big unification and like feeling like your community is under attack, under terrorism straight up. Like it was so beautiful to get a moment of joy, to be around other Latinos, and for us to be at least have 30 minutes to celebrate our culture when the whole, like all of US is kind of looking down upon us. I know we do have a community, but it's kind of hard to see it. So that celebration was super, like just made me so emotional.
I love that. I want to hear more reactions. Yeah.
My name is Camila and I'm a psychology major, but I really like that you two professors who specifically commented on your experiences watching it. So I also watched it kind of with my Caucasian boyfriend, and I identify as Latinx, but it was him and like a lot of his friends. So I was kind of worried that, they were really there for like Patriots and kind of like the football. And so I was scared that maybe they'd be wanting to turn it off because none of them spoke Spanish. I was like the only Spanish speaker, but everyone was really excited to actually see the performance. And so that was kind of embracing in a way, like maybe not being around like my usual crowd, but still getting to like enjoy it. And then like you were saying, then Lady Gaga popped out and they're like, oh my God, like Lady Gaga, like I know who that is. And so it was kind of like refreshing to see that they were still able to enjoy it, even if it's not in like the language that they spoke. So that's definitely something that I love that you commentated on.
Oh, there's so many. I want to get everybody. Let's go from my left this way. So go ahead.
I thought the whole performance was beautiful, and I think it was a beautiful representation of the different, like, of another side of Hispanics. I feel like when it comes to media, a lot of times when you see Hispanics or Latinos, we're presented as like gangsters, like Scarface, or we're seen as the drug dealers, like right now in Mexico with the cartel, and all that. A lot of people just see the negative side of us, and that's what they believe us to be. But I think with his performance, he showed the warmth and the welcoming of the Hispanic community and the way that we have just community with each other. It's like, when you like apply for something, if you're Hispanic or Latino, a lot of times you're just fit into the one category, like you're not allowed to expand on your background. And I think he just showed that there's so much more than just the Hispanic or like the Latino. There's the Salvadorians, there's the Mexicans, there's Puerto Ricans. It just showed that we're not just one group. There's so many different flavors of us, and even though we come from very similar backgrounds, there's still differences that make each one of us different and stand out in different ways. And I think it was just a beautiful way for him to just show all that although we are one community, there's still so many parts of us that helps us to highlight one another and stand out.
Yeah, my name is Alexa Pelayo and I'm an English major. I love what you were saying about, the representation, because I kind of feel the same sort of frustration, like it's always drug affiliated or gang affiliated, but it was really cool to see all these different aspects of like little joys that you guys mentioned. And I also feel like it really fostered a sense of curiosity from people outside of the community and also inside. Like with the Piraguas, I was talking to some friends and we all were like, isn't that just basically a raspado? It's the same thing, it's like, no, actually, and here's the significance of that as well. And I watched it in a bar with my mom, her friends, and my friend, and everyone was just going crazy. Like my friend was born in Egypt, and we were going crazy, in the front. When my mom and when we saw the Nicaraguense flag, like we screamed. It was just such an incredible moment of celebration, of exploration, and it was.
And the reaction speaks to how rare it is to see positive representation of your community on TV.
Yeah, and I have like Filipina friends that were also super, they were texting me, they're like, oh, I loved it, they had their own little takes too, and the ways in which, even though they were technically outside of the Latino culture, they can, in a sense, really resonate with the sense of exclusion and also the celebration of life and culture and music.
It was interesting to see, and I'm going to get to Erica in a second, but with the Filipino-Latino connection, a lot of what I write about is the relationship between how colonialism has built a connection. And some of the most viral TikToks were from Filipinos that talked about how this resonated. But in the comments, you saw a lot of Latinos, Latinx folks chiming in about sharing their shared experiences with Filipinos, even if their flag wasn't our flag. wasn't represented. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bad Bunny's interesting because it's a Puerto Rican story, but it really is this larger like Latinx story, right? That I think he's speaking across. So he had Via's Tacos represented, which I guess is in Highland Park, I think, right? From what I've heard, I've never been, but I've heard it's like a Michelin star. It's supposed to be amazing tacos, right? But like, yeah, and then he passes the piragua to the guy who's doing the tacos, right? And then so there's like an interesting connection there. There's the call out at the end, as you guys talked about. There was even the little boy that played that he handed the Grammy to. He's like Argentinian and like Egyptian or something. I learned in his background. So it's an interesting kind of way, I think, of speaking to multiple groups, and the Americas as like the larger, right? Americas, and Brianna and I have talked about this, right? We ran into each other. And you had certain connections. You're like, oh, the kid sleeping on the chair at the end of the party. How many of us have been at parties and like been that kid or know the kid that, or the dominoes, or so certain things that I think referenced cross culture and even with other cultures as well, right? Even beyond like Latinx communities.
Yes.
My name is Saiva Rugio, and I'm faculty here in Theater and New Dance. I am a daughter of Guatemalan immigrants, and I have never, anyway, my experience watching the halftime show was like, I started sitting down, and then as soon as I saw the green, I just stood up, and it was like, I was a little girl, and it just felt like a journey, and I don't know why I'm crying. It was a journey of realizing how needed, in this moment. And also this, I grew up I came to LA when I was 9, and I grew up in Boyle Heights. And I know Via's Tacos, And it was like, I was like, that was Via's Tacos right there, And I thought, it started to dawn on me the kind of, in 13 minutes, how Bad Bunny and his team, like he must have an incredible team, and what kind of intention there was to really reach the message of inclusion, the layers of what inclusivity can mean, to reach out to the lady, in New York City who represents this decades and decades of, and to have now someone that is younger and his own story of how Via's Tacos came to be, in this community, to reach out to Ricky Martin, who in the Latino community was not accepted as a queer man, right? And so reaching out in all directions, like that was just, and it just kept going, and it just kept going, and I'm like, where are we going now, so that was amazing. And I don't know how to bring this up. I think that it's not about anybody's responsibility to carry the voices of all of our pains and injustices in the world. So I take what Bad Bunny did as a necessity and of opening, cracking something up so that we could exhale. And I don't think it's necessarily it was his journey or his space to say, free Palestine or free, right? But that is a weight that I've been living with too, and I see it, I want to see it as like, I recognize and I hope that for all of us, that we don't divide our joys, that we don't divide our conflicts of like, this colonialism, okay, we get to enjoy this freedom from it. No, that we're all under an umbrella of oppression. It doesn't matter what color we are, that we end, I guess, to not numb ourselves that these conflicts are ongoing, and that specifically a genocide has been going on. And this also just hit deep, in terms of that, and recognizing my own lineage in terms of what colonialism has meant for so many of us.
Yeah, I think that exposing
through various ways, whether it's the grass, the agricultural fields, the electrical wires, sugar cane. These are all illustrations of colonialism, but it triggers larger consciousness about colonialisms that are happening in other parts of the world. So thank you for bringing that up.
Could I add one other thing real quick?
Yes.
Sorry, real quick, just about, it got me thinking as you were speaking about like even just the representations of like indigenous and Afro-Latinx people that we often don't see represented. And I remember like when In the Heights came out with Lin-Manuel Miranda, that was a critique, was that there weren't enough like Afro-Latinos represented. And so I think there was a lot of intentionality in the ways that all that played out. In addition to even having like people we know like Pedro Pascal up there and Cardi B and other people, right, from different Latinx backgrounds being up there representing that. Just wanted to point that out, like in thinking about the space.
Yes.
My name is Benicio. I'm Boricua. I'm a history major, and I wrote a thesis on the impact of colonization in Puerto Rico. And yeah, the feeling obviously was very, very amazing, right, for my whole family, because we're all Boricua. And then my sister brought her Puerto Rico flag from her room when we were in the living room, and we were watching it out, and then obviously she was waving it as it was going around, right? So obviously my family is very, very into Puerto Rico and the whole thing, and it's very interesting when looking at the political structure of my whole family believes in, because we all believe Puerto Rico should be a state. So it's very interesting when looking at that, and I don't know how to like exactly transition this, but I actually have more of a question, which is they showed an actual marriage going on, which was a real marriage, and I was wondering, what do you guys think of the symbolism and how that kind of correlates to the celebration of life and celebration of of coming together?
I think that one of the things that keeps recurring is good art is detailed with a lot of specificity and intentionality. And it makes us go back and watch, and you see layers, and you have questions, and you sort of pick these moments. And, from the specific is where the universal is born. Where we think we're different, but then when we see the specificity, we realize how much we are alike. And when we see the entire story, the marriage moment being added into all of that, and we put that into what are the values that the other side of resistance said is not happening? Where do we see those values being shown? All of the values that we are saying is not happening is happening in that performance. The value of love and companionship, the value of community, the value of perseverance and preservation, the value of history, the value of ancestors, the value of elders, as well as taking care of the youth. So the entire performance, I feel like it's this beautiful, package. And like, if you just go in and keep dissecting, you start to realize like these are all the things that we need to survive as people, that we want to protect and we want to uplift.
I have a professor question, if that's okay.
I think there was a hand.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I had a question. My name's Stephanie. I work in strategic communications and staff here. Every time I've seen Bad Bunny speak, he talks about my country and how much I love my country. And I'm wondering if that's, is that an independence movement where he wants to see PR independent? And is that like a specific, I don't know if that's like a subtle way of being like, we should be our own country.
I'll say this as having been to the island, several times. Like it does feel like you're somewhere else. It's pretty unique in that way. It is a unique space, I think, because yes, technically it's part of the U.S., but you are culturally and sort of geographically, you're in a place where Spanish is freely sort of spoken. There's norms even around, like, for example, like traditionally there's like a giant lunch and people don't really right? They take time to have a big lunch and that's what you do with your family. And So there's things about it that are very unique, and I think maybe, and I don't know where his political stance is on this, whether he wants it to be independent. That's possible. I'm not sure, but I think that there is. I think it feels like it could be another country, right? I mean, it does have that space to it, right? And I think that that's kind of an important part of Hawaii. Feels similar when I visited Hawaii. It very much feels like that too. And you know, this is where those issues around colonization, right, and the relationship to of the United States is real tenuous, right, and there's a lot of conflict and tension around that.
Yes, and the complexity of the realities that we are dealing with, I think, when we, let me some James Baldwin, so I'm gonna butcher a quote, but he says, "I love America so much that I insist on the right to criticize her," right? So we hear from marginalized communities and communities of color, and there's this duality, this doubleness of we have to dance with the realities of colonialism and what it did to us, while also dance with the fact that this is also the country that I love. And that when I tell my story of my ancestry, or when we tell the story of our ancestry, I cannot do anything about the reality of what colonialism did to my ancestry. And me telling that story does not mean that I'm attacking you. It means I'm telling the reality, and that there's love, that we're still here. And so if the resistance is like, when I hear someone say my country, that makes me think they're not saying it as our country, that's a them problem. When I hear him say my country, I feel pride in that too, and solidarity in that too.
So the last question I want to ask, and then if I imagine that afterwards we can socialize one-on-one once we break, but the last, I have a professor question. Bad Bunny's performance was a production of music and art, but it was also a production of knowledge. You're all professors. How do you see the Super Bowl performance? How could you see it being integrated into the courses you teach? And what could students learn from watching this performance in your classes?
I can start. Yeah, I mean, we're even going to talk about it today, actually. So one of the perspectives that I like to bring in when it comes to music is sampling, which has been a very heavily demonized art form I mean, it goes back into the 40s where sampling was first in musique concrète and all of that, but I mean, really made popular with the hip hop community and then the black community, and really was demonized as it's stealing and it's not real, but neglecting to look at it as paying homage to the people who came before, which I think is very similar to what we were talking about of, like, you know, bringing Ricky Martin, and even like this activity of Bad Bunny passing down a Grammy to a child. I mean, it's about lineage, it's about ancestry, and it's about passing the torch and taking reference from the past. And Bad Bunny samples a lot and is very, very like intentional about the sampling that he chooses. What we're going to talk about today when we discuss sampling is about in Nueva York, how he chooses to sample a Bronx-based group in a song that's about New York. And there's a lot of, again, intentionality in choosing what songs are going to be sampled and why. And it's paying respects to the artists that came before him, which sampling as an art form has been doing that for generations and generations. So in my class, you know, we talk about music production. It's a huge, huge part of that. And we're going to talk about it today.
I'm still figuring that out because it's such a great piece of art that I have to wrestle with it, right? And I'm not going to figure it out in one semester because this is one of those works of art that you will come back to, and every time you come back to it, you're going to be in a different place in your life. You're going to see it a different way. You're going to see something new. And so I look forward to continuing to revisit it. But specifically looking from the standpoint that artists are preservers of cultural history and reality, and that what we create reflects the time we live in And that reflects, that tells a story of how we got here, and it tells a story of where we're going, and that's part of why I think people who have resistance to stories of this being told is because now we're asking questions. What do you mean? I need to now go figure out what happened with the colonialism of Puerto Rico. I now want to ask questions about the cacique. I want to ask these questions, right? But that's what artists do. We don't just entertain, we also educate.
And
Yeah.
final word?
Yeah, so I teach a Latinx sociology course. So I talked about it briefly in my class when I started, very briefly. But we're gonna do a cultural productions like sort of piece. And I actually used to have them look at a Bad Bunny video, but now there's this new piece, right, that I could have them look at and dissect and go through. So I think that's relevant. We'll talk about that. And I think, that, again, from a sociological perspective, just a lot of hearkening back to history, hearkening back to, colonialism, but also joy, also resistance efforts, social change. Like, what is he, like the questions I was asked here, where do we go from here, I think is really powerful. And so those are some of the things, we'll be grappling with. And it's really interesting to hear you both from different disciplines, right? How you're taking these pieces.
We'll do a course together.
Right? I know.
Well, thank you, everyone. I just wanted to say today was an example of the power of art, but also the power of community and coming together and dialogue, conversation. We hope that today is just step one for a longer journey of asking questions about resistance, social movements, music, art, history, and I can't wait to see what comes out of this.
Yeah.